professional athletes, they often have more coaches than someone who's doing something at an amateur level. And so there's something to be said about having mentors and coaches, no matter what level of expertise you have.
Welcome to the Feast Over Famine podcast. On this podcast, we're navigating the tension that we find where mission and profit collide. We're talking to CEOs, founders, executive directors, impact investors, and all of what we've identified as the global ecosystem of the social enterprise, business for transformation, business as mission landscape. We're talking to them about the obstacles they face, the strategic challenges they've been through, how they're funded, how they were started, and everything that's happened in between. We are trying to share their story in a way that's impactful to help us all to grow the social enterprise space for the better. Enjoy this week's episode with your host, Ryan Mahaffey.
All right, everyone, welcome to part 3 of our managing burnout, especially in a servant-hearted type of role episode. Really stoked you guys are here. And if you've listened to the other 2 episodes, our prayer in our heart is that this has just been super helpful. It's something that can be really, really challenging and really hard to grow through. Last week, we talked about being present where you are and the different types of seasons we're in and how to keep kind of physically and emotionally fit, relationally fit, and how all that plays into burnout. And so we're really, really enjoying this series. Hope you guys are enjoying it. And we're going to dive right back in this week, kicking things off with the last handful of these bullet points and then how to recover from burnout. And so that's going to be part of our conversation today and diving into these things. So again, hope you guys are enjoying it. Enjoy this week's episode. And then we're going to be, after this, cruising into some really cool conversations over the next few weeks with some other projects and other things going on around the world. So enjoy this week's episode.
Okay, moving on to number 9. This is a huge one that honestly we could have put as number 1, but we've got to remember why we started doing what we're doing and keep that in front of us on the good days and the bad days. Because if we lose sight of that vision, then we will spiral into burnout really quickly on that.
Totally. Yeah. And if you, a lot of thoughts on this. Yes. That's not always going to be like unicorns and rainbows, right?
Right.
I think if you are sitting in a burnout season and you're like really burnt out and you've been there for a while and you're trying to do this and you can't figure out why you are there, that might be a good season for change. Mm-hmm. I was burnt out probably 6 months or so before I made the decision that at some point I was going to leave Red Bull. Mm-hmm. And it was good for me not to just be like, oh man, I'm just like discontent and burnt out and ready for a change are 2 different things, right? So you need to sit in discontent long enough to know that it's time for a change and reflect on those things. For me, when I realized that discontent had moved to a change of heart and what I was called to do, I was cross-country skiing in northern Wisconsin on New Year's, and I'd been burnt out for almost 6 months at Red Bull. And I just had this moment that I realized, I'm thinking in my head and all this stuff. And I was like, okay, the main reason that I'm still here doing this job is because I'm scared to lose the paycheck and consistent income. I'm scared to lose benefits. I'm scared to lose all these things that I finally have some security on, and losing those things is terrifying to me. And then I thought the 16-year-old version of me at a punk rock show in a mosh pit would punch me in the face right now if they knew that that's why I was staying somewhere. And so for me, I was like, okay, yeah, that's a good reason to shift, And so you have to be careful. You have a lot of responsibilities, but just a first thing is if you've been sitting in discontent for too long, know when to make that shift. Right. And maybe before I keep rambling, you have thoughts on that, Erica?
Well, we're going to get more to that one in a little bit too, Ryan. But no, I think that, for me, I'm a big visual person. And so for instance, our nonprofit that my husband and I have is focusing on rural Africa. And so we literally have a picture of 3 kids from the community that we serve in Africa. And that serves as a constant reminder for me and a motivation of, okay, when I don't want to make one more fundraising phone call, or when I don't want to, spend more time doing program development, to remember like the impact that it can have on their life. It just keeps it constantly in front of me like that on good days and bad days, like we've said.
Totally. And it's super important. I love the idea of having that picture up there and doing that. And so, yeah, and that might not, like, I'm trying to think if there's a version of that that's there for me, but yeah, I think it's just another example that it's different for everybody. The other thing to think about on this is to know, like, it's realistic to have those ups and downs, especially in entrepreneurship. And so if you're an entrepreneur or you started a founder or nonprofit, if you've started something that could be a ministry, nonprofit, a business, whatever, you're going to have those seasons, and it's normal. So the first thing is not to like panic when that happens. Cause I know some people that haven't experienced that. It's like, oh man, did I make the wrong decision? No, that's just normal. And we're just going to experience it. So just accept that as a reality and know it's there. I know for me, it's like, I call it like the 6-week factor. About every 6 weeks, like the 6th week. And it took me a while to figure this out. I just have an off mental week, and I'm just kind of like, man, is this a good idea? Is this what we want to be doing? And it's not like existential dread. It's just a little bit of like I'm a little worn out there. And so I don't know how many times it happened. And then I was like, you know what? I think it's like every 6th week, I just have a week where I'm just not super motivated. I'm not totally in it. My brain's a little off. And then I just snap out of it naturally. And so I just started saying like, oh, it's just the 6th week. And I'll even tell Kira, I'm like, yeah, I'm just in one of those 6 weeks. Like, it's just there. It's not always, maybe it's 5 weeks sometimes, and maybe it's, 8 weeks the next time, or 2 months. But I think recognizing rhythms that just kind of happens for you. And just saying, oh, that's what it is. I think that's okay. And I think it's actually really helpful to know what that is.
Right. Yeah. I think too, we talk about vision leaks, but sometimes like you've got to just be so intentional about that. Like I think about a season in youth ministry where we had a weekly outreach service, and every week we would meet with our leaders beforehand, and it got old, and you didn't always want to get there early to have the meeting with people. But every week we out loud together set our vision for the night, because we didn't want to lose sight of that vision. And it really, impacted lives, but it kept us all focused on, okay, we've got to reset from what we were doing the rest of the day. And this is why we're here. This is why, we're doing what we're doing. And then it allows us to focus on the vision for even just for that 2 hours or something, and I think, Ryan, you said about the 6-week factor. And I think something that kind of goes alongside of that is just knowing your own self, that, it may feel like this is some horrible season and it's not ending. But just knowing ourselves and kind of just knowing, okay, that I know it's a 6-week factor for me, or, hey, I know that there's this seasonal thing where in the winter, it's really hard for me to get motivated, or, in the summer, it's really hard for me to get motivated. And just being able to keep the vision in front of us constantly helps us to push through those hard weeks or those hard seasons.
Yeah. What's really coming out in a lot of this is like a deep self-awareness helps you to not burn out. And that's not easy, right? Like, I think that's sometimes that's just a strength that some people have and other people don't. But it's one that, even if it's not your strength, like to just internally self-analyze and all that stuff, it's a really important one to try to just develop enough that you can do some of these things. Because a lot of what we're talking about is just like recognizing these things and then figuring out what to do with it. We'll talk about who to surround yourself with in a minute, but yeah, I'm totally tracking with you. And, I think those are really helpful pieces of the puzzle for sure. One thing go ahead.
Sorry. There's different ways that you can kind of objectively evaluate some of those things too. I know, like I've read a couple really good books on burnout when I was in the midst of kind of some burnout season on the serving over in Africa. But then another thing that there's a pastor that he talks more about in terms of when you are tempted to make bad decisions or to, head down the wrong path. He said, you have to halt before you make those decisions. He says, and it's an acronym, that the H, if you're hungry, if you're angry, if you're lonely, or if you're tired, you're going to be more apt to make poor decisions that help you, that take you down the wrong path, and you lose sight of where you want to be going. And I think it's kind of the same here, where it's like, maybe I am just tired, and that's why I'm in this rough place right now. But there are those objective ways to step back and evaluate it versus trying to just kind of figure it out on your own.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, that's that. I love that acronym. And I think that's that's a great way, like you said, to make it a little more objective. So hopefully people write that one down.
Yeah. Okay. Moving on to number 10. We said number 10 is to avoid the martyrdom approach. So Ryan, why don't you flesh out what that means for us?
Yeah. You're like, I don't want to take that one. That one makes people angry sometimes. Ryan, you can deal with it. This is this goes back to what we were saying earlier. Like, I think a lot of times when we're wanting to serve, this is probably the one that relates most to social enterprise or ministry. Like, I mean, these all do, but this one's very specific. Like, we oftentimes say, I'm going to go serve others. And this is the traditional ministry nonprofit mindset. Since I'm serving others, I'm going to get less in other areas. And I don't think that philosophically or even theologically, I don't think that that's wrong. But I think if you say, I am going to give up certain things so that I can serve others, but you're working equally as hard as the CEO of a major company making tons of money or something, there is a recipe for failure in there. The cleanest example is if you are like, hey, I want to help people in inner city Denver, and this organization is going to pay me $30,000 a year to do that. And just to live in Denver on rent costs me $20,000 a year. If you're so stressed in your personal life and you're working, another job to kind of make up for it and make the ends meet, and you're so stressed like that, you're just setting yourself up for burnout. And so if you're in a scenario where you're saying like, I call it martyrdom, right? I think we know the term martyr. Right. If you're just entering into that season with that mentality, there's going to be a certain point where that just fails you. And again, I think there's scenarios with like missions and things. There's scenarios to do this and do this well where it does work. But I have seen that be like one of the number one causes of burnout in especially the nonprofit space out there. So I think it's just one to be really careful of and to think through.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's good. Okay. Number 11 is have a mentor or a sidekick, someone that you can bounce ideas off, someone who is going to be in your corner and cheering you on, and someone that you can just go to when things are hard or even when things are good and you want to share some successes. Having that someone that you can look up to that's gone before you is huge in avoiding burnout.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's multiple people too, right? Right. I know for me, like I wouldn't have had the guts to go do Feast Over Famine in the season that I chose to do it. If it wasn't for Kira, my wife, like she basically gave me permission to go do it, to take our money to go do it and to potentially fail, and never gave up on it. In the seasons and times that I was about to give up on it, having her there. So I think in your closest relationships, you need that buy-in, and you don't just need that person bought in to where they're just not going to get mad at you or whatever, but you need them to be in your corner, both for the good and the bad. You need them to say, hey, like, get out of bed and go work because you suck. Like, hurry up, like go make some money. And also to say, hey, like, I know it's a rough season, but I think you've given it your all. Like, have some grace with yourself and let's just let it ride out. Like, you need someone, the people close in your life. This is going to, no matter what you do, your work and your career and pursuing excellence in those things is going to affect the people around you. Mm-hmm. And you need those people bought in those kinds of ways. Right. So I think that's one of those. And then I know for me, there was a point that you can't expect those people close in your life to be your like coach or your mentor. And so there's a point for me that writing a really scary big check to hire an executive coach who was a mentor of mine and to actually like enter into a coaching relationship was one of the best things that I could have done for my career. And part of that was, I was just like, man, I kept putting that on Kira, my wife, to process with her and say, hey, is this good? Is that good? And that wasn't her skill set. Like, she doesn't know how to build a coaching consulting company, particularly the way that we were thinking. And so to get somebody who's an expert in that to coach and help, that was huge, and right. You can find people can find their own examples of this. And then the next step of that for me was having like you on the team, Erica. We talked about this earlier, like then having a sidekick, someone to like bounce ideas off of, and to have you join a call that I thought was going to be tough, or, hey, I don't really know about this project. Can you join with me to be able to debrief and not be in it? So there's multiple versions of what this looks like. You know, it's interesting for you, Erica, I'm sure, as I'm looking at your picture on Zoom with you and McLeese, your husband, like running an NGO in Africa together, where it's like you guys are kind of all those things for each other. So, but yeah, those are some of my thoughts on this one and how it's played out for me, but I'd be curious your thoughts as well for you.
Well, I think it goes back into what we were talking about earlier with having a team, but this team is more focused on you as an individual and as a leader. Because I think, like we've talked about, as a leader, you're pouring out all the time. And so to have someone who might be someone who's literally just a mentor pouring into you, or it might be someone where maybe you're the executive director or the business owner. And so people who aren't at that level of leadership, they don't get the stresses that you're feeling, the decisions you're having to make. And so even having that sidekick of another business owner or another executive director to be like, hey, how are you dealing with this? Or what are you doing with this? Can be huge. And, you know, we saw a lot of that at the beginning and during the first part of COVID, when people were saying, we've got to make these transitions, we've got to make these protocols and things like that. And it's like, if you're an executive director or a business owner, the people who are showing up for working their shifts, they're not thinking about those kinds of decisions. And so to be able to network with people and say, hey, how are you guys handling masks, or how are you guys handling cleaning, or how are you guys handling social distancing? I think that was huge for people, but it's something that we can learn from just in our day-to-day life of meeting with people who are at that same level of leadership that we're at. And I think, you know, like I said, just people that remind us of where we're at and who we're doing. You know, I think it's interesting that even professional athletes, they often have more coaches than someone who's doing something at an amateur level. And so there's something to be said about having mentors and coaches, no matter what level of expertise you have.
Totally. Yeah. Such a value in that. Yeah. Like the most elite athletes in the world have coaches, you know, for a reason. And T-ball, little league baseball kids have coaches. Like it's okay and needed. And, you know, and they don't have coaches just for their craft or their skill. Like they have coaches for all sorts of things. Like we talked about earlier, that full kind of spectrum of stuff. So yeah, I'm totally with you on that.
Getting that different perspective can make all the difference in letting someone endure for the long haul versus burning out quickly.
Yeah. So I think it's good to maybe like, you know, if you're listening to that and you're like, oh, maybe this is an area I'm struggling, like just kind of take an internal audit of like, where do you feel kind of alone? And like, you could use other people and list those out. And maybe that's 5 things. And those are 5 different people and you go get those. And sometimes that means you have to pay someone to do. I think it's really important to be okay paying somebody to do that, because they're committing to a different kind of relationship. If you're just asking your friend and you're saying, hey, can you kind of hold me accountable or challenge me in this way? Maybe your friend is going to prioritize you for the next 6 months and do that with excellence. And that's a great friend. But I think paying somebody and them committing to you and they're the one driving the ship is actually really important, because these are sometimes not the things on the top of our priority list to do, but that person's going to kind of bring you back into it.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So the next one, number 12 on how to avoid burnout, is we've kind of hinted at it in several points along the way, but just to cut your losses when it's time. That there may be times where you can persevere through burnout and you can pick up and keep going, but there's going to be times where you just say, okay, I'm done. It's time to close the business or sell the business or close the nonprofit, or it could look different for every person, but just to know when enough is enough and to be able to make that hard decision with confidence.
Yeah. Yeah. And you said it perfectly, like, and we talked about it earlier, but I guess all I'll say on this is, I've seen plenty of people, they're codependent on the thing they've created. And so whether, like you said, it's a business or a nonprofit, they can't just accept that it's not working. And this is a pretty like, you know, detrimental, devastating stage to be in with something, right? So don't go to this one quickly, but I do think it's important to recognize sometimes man, this isn't working. I've dumped a ton of money into this thing, and maybe it's time to either shut it down. We've suggested to clients sometimes just, hey, like, let's just shut it down for 6 months and take a break, refresh, and restart it in a different way. Because we're sinking money and time or effort into this thing. Or maybe it's time to just say, hey, this isn't working. And so the main reason I put this on here, or we put this on here, was to just say, we have seen this play out with client projects quite a bit. And I've seen it play out and kind of go up in flames and crash and burn to the form of like bankruptcy, because people take on so much debt because they're not willing to just let it go. But I've also seen the good sides of that, where people have cut their loss and sold their business maybe for less than they were thinking, but then got out and then they go do something else and they're in a thriving season. I think of a client of ours that was a physical therapist, and he was just kind of like just struggling, and it was really, really tough. And he did good. He got by, and he just kind of put his business up there and sold it. And then he went and worked for another office and sent us a card, like, I don't know, like 9 months later or a year later, and just saying like, hey, thanks for helping us in this season. Like, this has been really cool. So that was a scenario where he kind of cut his losses in a really positive way. And just said, this isn't really working for this season. And then was thriving as a result of it. So just thinking for yourself of like, is this a time to just pump the brakes and make a shift and do that?
Right. Okay. Well, we're almost at the end of our list, and these last three kind of go together for a lot of people who have been down this road, and that you have struggled with burnout and dealt with it. These are going to be kind of obvious, but we're going to go there because a lot of people, it's a matter of actually doing it versus just having it on a list on paper. But the first thing is to avoid future burnout. Like, you've got to take the time to recover from burnout. There's so many different things being written about compassion fatigue and about the physical ways that stress affects you and all of the ways that burnout affects you. And so we really like to avoid future burnout in our lives. We've got to take time to call burnout what it is, and then take time to recover from it. And so, Ryan, I'm going to lump these three together.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea.
Yeah. But, for some people that looks like getting counseling. I know a lot of people coming off from the mission field and working internationally, or coming out of leadership positions where they've been managing people, they've got to get counseling in order to just regain perspective on things. And so I think it used to be so taboo to get counseling, but really, if we're all honest, probably everybody in our lives at one point or another, we need to get some counseling, but especially coming out of a season of burnout. And then the last one is just scheduling time for a season of sabbatical or time off, or whatever you call it. I think that the business world can be good about this in, saying you've got to work X amount of hours, you've got to take X amount of vacation time, but really just scheduling time where you are able to just have a break completely. I think, Ryan, how you're talking about how people's identities are so tied into the businesses and nonprofits that they've started, and a sabbatical where we're kind of released from that helps us to regain our sense of identity, to say, okay, like, even if my business fails or my nonprofit shuts down, that doesn't define who I am. And having that separation where we can truly rest and truly recover without having to be on call 24/7 helps us avoid burnout in the next thing that we do.
Yeah. And you laid those out perfectly. Yeah. And so a couple thoughts. When I was really burnt out with Red Bull, and I decided to leave, I actually gave them a 2-month notice that I was going to leave. And that went well, because they're like, wow, I thought I didn't know if I was going to get fired that day on the spot and not have an option or that, but it gave me a couple of months to prepare for that and to save a little. And then I took 2 months and came back out to Colorado, and I just mountain biked and camped and stayed with friends and played Frisbee and just did what I needed for me. I was so burnt out. And so to just be able to take that time was really good. So I think a sabbatical is something, burnout is somewhat inevitable for all of us, right? Especially if you're working in an area of serving others, and that could be in a for-profit, like you're a leader and you're just serving your team and going hard. And even as in families, like if you're raising kids or doing that, like you can get burnt. So setting aside time for sabbatical shouldn't be something, none of these things should be something that you only do if you are, burnt out and ready to recover and you're like, okay, now it is, schedule sabbatical every couple of years or do those things. A lot of pastors do that and it's really helpful. I think it's more of a like pastors know that term more than anybody else, or I think in the academic space, it's more of a thing. Right. But we need to make that more of a reality. Like people do that for a reason. And so I think having that sabbatical time is really, really important to figure out what that means. And that might mean it's a 1-day sabbatical once a month, or it's a month a year that you take off, or it's something like that. So I think that's really important to build a rhythm in, and maybe it's every couple of years, but to build a rhythm of sabbatical in, I think is really important. And that's not just rest. Like that's like right. Intentional, deep away from it time. And then counseling, like you said, I'm a firm believer in counseling. I've been to counseling a lot, and I think it's just something that is really helpful for everybody. And again, don't always wait till after you're burnt out to do it. Right. So if you're burnt out, obviously counseling is going to potentially help. Sometimes you're just burnt out. Like I didn't need counseling for being burnt out at Red Bull. It was just, I just got burnt out this season and that wasn't there. But I think, going a lot of times, especially if you're serving others or in ministry or social enterprise, you are taking on that emotional burden and spiritual burden, and getting counseling, like you said, can be helpful, but it could be helpful to include that as part of your team. Like we talked about earlier, like a mentor or a sidekick kind of thing, to include that person in your team and say, hey, I want to go to counseling like once a month to just be able to process some of what I'm going through so that I can not burn out and I can be healthy long-term. Right. And so I think it's figuring out what that looks like for you. And the last thing I want to say on this, and I think this is just the position that we potentially come from, like some of this, a lot of the examples we're giving and a lot of the things do come from a little bit of a privileged ability, right? Like totally. There are people working 6 jobs and around the clock and single parenting and really struggling to climb out of debt or all sorts of things. And they're hearing this and being like, how could you just go take 2 months off? And so I just want to recognize, like, there is a level, and we don't have to get into systemic racism or any of that kind of stuff on this call, but there is a level that your ability to do some of the things to take care of yourself. I mean, a lot of health insurance companies don't even cover counseling or mental health. And so you have to pay for that out of pocket a lot of times. So part of the reason that if it's coming across that way and you're sitting here listening to this podcast episode from an angle of saying like, wow, I don't have the ability to do any of those things. One, I would just challenge you to ask if you do and you're just not prioritizing it, but there is scenarios where you just don't. Part of this is geared towards leaders of organizations doing these kinds of things that most likely have the ability to do these things. And then I hope there's some there, but I do want to just kind of call that out as like a closing thought on some of the stuff, especially how to recover, because as we talk about, me having the ability at Red Bull to take a couple months off, like I was making a good salary, I was right. single, and I was able to save up for that. And I remember getting an Instagram message one day from someone being like, hey, how do you have the ability to just like not work for these 2 or 3 months and gallivant around Colorado mountain biking? Part of that was I'd saved a ton of money when I was at Red Bull, right? Like I was just prioritizing that. But I just want to call it out there that there is a level of privilege that plays throughout all this stuff, and figuring out what that looks like for you and your season in that is going to be different than everybody else.
Mm-hmm. And I think too that, these aren't all like the catch-all on how to avoid burnout, but I think that there's little ways, like we've said all along, that you can apply each one of these a little bit. So maybe you're not able to take a 2-month sabbatical, but maybe you're able to say, hey, I'm going to get up 30 minutes earlier every day and focus on this that I need to refuel me. Or maybe it's, hey, I'm going to sleep 30 minutes later every day because having this 30 minutes of time to do something else is not productive and refueling. So I think that there are little ways to apply all of these no matter what situation you're in as well. Totally.
Yeah. Well, cool. Erica, thanks for diving in on this one. This has been a lot of fun. And so I think if you're listening to this, this is probably going to be part 3. We're going to break this up in a couple episodes, but Erica, thanks for spending the time of digging in on this. It's been a lot of fun, and our hope and prayer for everybody that listens is that you really walk away with like a couple of things that are super helpful, and it just helps you thrive in whatever you're doing, and whoever helps you serve whoever you've been called to serve in a more powerful way.
Totally. And obviously, if you've listened this far into it, you know that both of us are speaking from experience at some point in our lives. So we would love if there's a way we can help for you to get through the season that you're in, or to kind of plan ahead to avoid burnout. We would love to be a part of that too. So don't hesitate to reach out to us.
Totally. Cool. Well, thanks, Erica. All right, everyone. Thank you for listening to another week of the Feast Over Famine podcast. We are so thankful you guys are here and listening. As always, hit that subscribe button on your favorite podcast listening apps. We would love to keep you guys up to date on new episodes that are coming out, when we're launching new episodes, when we're launching new seasons, and everything in between. So when we're in season, episodes are dropping every single Wednesday. Hit that subscribe button. Make sure you're up to date. Also, if you're loving what we're doing, be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, where we're constantly posting about our projects, what they're doing, what kinds of things we're working on. We'll recycle some podcasts, things about our partners, all sorts of fun stuff that you want to see. So hit us up on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, all that kind of stuff, and check out what we're doing there. And yeah, we're stoked that you guys are listening. We hope this has been really fruitful, and we will catch you guys next week. And lastly, as you guys all know, we always talk about all sorts of things with impact investing, investment opportunities, entity structure modeling, how projects are getting capital. And as a disclaimer and a reminder, Feast Over Famine does not provide legal, tax, accounting, or other professional advice. You should consult professional advisors concerning the legal, tax, or accounting consequences of any activities related to your project or a project you're supporting. Feast Over Famine doesn't consult, advise, or assist with the offer or sale of securities in any capital raising transaction. We don't do that for the direct or indirect promotion or maintenance of a market for any securities. And Feast Over Famine does not engage in any activities for which an investment advisor's registration or license is required under the U.S. Investment Advisors Act of 1940 or under any other applicable federal or state law, or for which a broker's or dealer's registration or license is required under the U.S. Securities Exchange Act of 1934 or under any other applicable federal or state law. So there's your investment disclaimer. Hopefully that's helpful if you need it. And if you ever have any questions on that side of things, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Take care.